I once told them he hit me. They looked at me as if I were the most imaginative child in the room. Our house sat in a quiet suburb, where the lawn was always trimmed and the flags on the porches gently moved in the wind. Neighbors smiled, dogs barked when strangers passed by, and everything looked exactly like a normal American family. No one heard the bedroom door lock at night. No one heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway. My name is Easton Brooks. I was 10 that year. My mother said I was sensitive, a dreamer. Daniel, her new husband, preferred the word dramatic. During the day, he could rest his hand on my shoulder in front of others, smile, ask about my homework. During the day, I almost believed I had imagined everything. But at night, when the house fell silent and the television turned off, he became someone else. No smile, no gentle voice, only the smell of alcohol and warm breath behind my neck. The first time I spoke up, I thought things would change. We were eating dinner. Silverware tapped against plates. Mom asked why I looked sad. I looked straight at her and said, "He hurts me." Daniel lifted his head from his glass. No anger, no panic. He simply smiled, the smile of someone who already knew he would win. Mom looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were not hateful. They were worse. They were the eyes of someone begging me to take the words back. "Easton," she whispered, "don't make things up." I tried to explain. I talked about the locked door. I talked about the nights I couldn't sleep. I said I was scared. Daniel placed his hand on the table, tilted his head, as if he were being patient with an overly sensitive child. "The boy watches too many movies," he said. I waited for my mother to object. She didn't. Instead, she told me to apologize. In that moment, I realized there was something more terrifying than what happened in the dark. It was telling the truth, and no one wanting to hear it. I said, "I'm sorry." I remember the taste of food turning bland in my mouth. I remember the air conditioner running. I remember Daniel smiling again, as if he had just fixed something that had slipped out of place. That night, he didn't need to say much. He simply stood at my door longer than usual, long enough for me to understand the new rule of this family. If I spoke, I would lose everything. If I stayed silent, at least everything would remain. In the days that followed, I began to doubt myself. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe I was truly sensitive. Maybe other kids were scared like me. They just didn't make a scene. But pain is not imaginary. Bruises are not imaginary. The way I jumped at every footstep wasn't imaginary either. So I started doing the only thing a 10-year-old boy could do. I memorized. I memorized dates. I memorized how much he drank. I memorized the things he said. I repeated them in my head like homework. I believed that one day, if I could tell it perfectly, someone would have to believe me. But that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I learned another lesson. The truth cannot protect itself. It needs someone who wants to hear it. And in this house, I was completely alone. Someone came to my house. I remember thinking, so it finally happened. That morning began like any other, with the smell of coffee and the low murmur of the news from the living room. Sunlight came through the windows, making everything look clean and peaceful, as if this house had never held any secrets. Daniel wore a collared shirt, more polite than usual. My mother cleared the table faster, her hands trembling slightly, though her mouth still tried to hold a smile. When the doorbell rang, my heart pounded so loudly I thought the person outside could hear it. A woman stood on the porch. She wore a jacket with a badge and held a notebook. Her voice was gentle, professional, the voice of someone who had heard many sad stories but still tried to keep hope. She said she was from Child Protective Services. I looked at Mom. She looked at me, then at Daniel. Daniel opened the door wide, invited her in, polite like the perfect host. He even made coffee, asked if she needed sugar. If someone had filmed that moment, they would have thought I was the luckiest kid in the world. The woman sat on the sofa. She said she wanted to speak with me alone. I felt a small light turn on in my chest. Alone. No Daniel, no Mom. Maybe this time I could tell everything. But before we moved, Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder. The squeeze was light, but enough to remind me of the night before. He bent down to my eye level, smiled, his voice a whisper only I could hear. "Good boy, right?" I followed the woman to the dining table. She opened her notebook. She asked if I knew why she was there. I nodded. She asked, "Do you feel safe at home?" The question was simple in a terrifying way. I looked down at my hands. I knew that if I said no, everything would explode. Daniel might be arrested. Mom might cry. I might have to go somewhere else, another family, another school. I didn't know what waited for me there. I only knew what waited for me if I spoke. I remembered the dinner, the apology, the way Mom had looked at me. I looked up. Mom stood in the kitchen, but her eyes were on me, not shaking her head, not nodding. Just a plea for silence hanging between us. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Calm. He knew I had been taught what to do. The woman asked again, softer. "Easton, are you safe?" I realized I was standing between two kinds of fear. One I knew, one I had never tried, and I chose the familiar one. "I'm okay," I said. I heard my own voice, distant, like it belonged to someone else. The woman watched me for a few more seconds. I wondered if she saw anything in my eyes. I wondered if she recognized a child drowning while still trying to stand straight. Finally, she closed her notebook. She said thank you. She said if anything happened, I could call. She left a business card on the table, where Daniel could see it most clearly. After she left, the house was silent for a long time. Mom exhaled as if she had survived an accident. Daniel patted my head, told me I was a good boy. That night, he didn't do anything. He didn't need to, because I had learned how to lock my own mouth. I lay in bed, staring at the business card I had hidden under my pillow. I read the phone number over and over until I memorized it. I imagined myself calling, imagined someone coming faster, stronger, not asking if I was safe, but simply taking me away. But I didn't call, because now I understood something else. Saving a child only works when the child dares to destroy his own world, and I wasn't brave enough. I stopped asking for help. Instead, I began to prepare. That thought came to me on a very ordinary afternoon, as I sat at the back of the classroom listening to other kids talk about their families. They complained about curfews, about homework, about parents not letting them go out. I listened as if they were describing another planet. I no longer wanted anyone to come save me. I had seen what happened when adults came and then left. I had seen hope open and slam shut like the bedroom door every night. If someone was going to change my life, it had to be me. The school library became my shelter. It smelled like old paper, the air conditioner hummed steadily, and no one looked at me too long. No one asked why I liked sitting alone. I walked through the shelves without knowing what I was looking for. Until one day, I stopped at the law section. I didn't understand most of the words, but I understood one idea. The truth is not enough. It needs evidence. I stood between the shelves, my heart pounding as if I had discovered a secret door adults had forgotten to lock. If this world had its own language to decide who was believed, then I would learn that language. I borrowed books too difficult for my age. I read slowly, looked up every word. I learned about witnesses, procedures, about how a story had to be told in order to survive in court. At night, when Daniel passed by my room, I closed my eyes and repeated what I'd learned. I imagined that one day I would stand in a brightly lit room and he would not be able to smile anymore. I began to see everything differently. I was no longer just a trapped child. I was someone collecting. I collected time. I collected the way he spoke in front of others. I collected my mother's silence. I even collected my fear, kept it like a fuel I didn't yet know how to use. There were days I was tired, days I wanted to forget everything and become a normal kid. But every time Daniel smiled, every time he called me sensitive, I remembered why. He believed time was on his side. I decided it would stand on mine. In high school, I joined the debate club. The first time I spoke in front of a crowd, my hands shook so hard I had to grip the wooden podium. But I realized something strange. When I spoke, people listened. They might not agree, but they couldn't tell me to apologize for opening my mouth. I became addicted to that feeling. A teacher said I had talent for law. I carried that sentence home like a precious secret, hiding it as deep as the business card under my pillow years ago. I began to see the future, blurry but real. College, law school, a place where my words would have weight. Daniel was still there. He aged a little, hair thinner, but his confidence unchanged. He believed I would grow up, leave, and take the silence with me as a parting gift. He was right about me leaving. He was wrong about the silence. The day I received my law school acceptance letter, I sat alone on the front steps. My hands trembled, just like the day CPS came. But this time, it wasn't fear. This time it was because I could see the road. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know if I was strong enough. I only knew one thing. One day, I would be in a room where truth had rules, and I would know how to use them. The file lay on my desk on a morning that seemed ordinary. The defendant's name made the blood in my body turn cold. I was used to names. Every day at the prosecutor's office, they came and went, printed on paper, attached to charges, to dates, to lives I only stepped into for a few short hours of trial. I had learned to see them as work, not memory. But that morning when I opened the folder and read the first line, every sound in the room disappeared. Daniel Brooks. I read it again. Slower. As if I read carefully enough, the letters would rearrange themselves into someone else. They didn't. Outside the glass, the city kept moving. Cars, horns, pedestrians rushing with coffee in their hands. My colleagues laughed at the end of the hallway. Printers ran. A new workday had begun. But inside me, time reversed. I saw the old kitchen. I heard the silverware. I heard my voice saying, "He hurts me," and the silence after. 20 years. 20 years I had gone far enough to believe the past would need a map to find me, and now it had walked into my office on its own. I turned the page. Victim, male, 11 years old. I had to put the file down because my hands began to shake. A wave of nausea rose, not from surprise, but from the terrible familiarity of it. Age, gender, description of behavior, method of denial. Everything was a copy. I had chosen to prosecute domestic abuse because I believed I could stand between fear and the law without collapsing. I believed I had built enough distance to no longer be a 10-year-old boy. I was wrong. There was a knock on my door. My assistant asked if I was okay. I said yes. I had practiced that answer my whole life. When she left, I looked at the name again. Daniel Brooks. It wasn't that he had disappeared from my life. I was the one who left. I changed phone numbers, changed cities, built a new name with a title in front of it. I thought that would be enough. But crime doesn't need an address. I read the police notes. Arrested after a teacher reported. The child finally spoke, unlike me. Part of me felt relieved that boy was braver. Another part felt jealous. I stood, walked to the window, tried to breathe the way I had learned in therapy years ago. Name the facts. Stay in the present. I am a prosecutor. I have a duty. But there was another truth, quieter. I was the first witness. I just had never been heard. There were clear rules about conflict of interest. I could pass this case to someone else. No one would blame me. They would even understand. I imagined another person in my place, someone whose hands didn't shake, someone who didn't hear his heartbeat in his ears when calling the defendant's name. Daniel would like that. He always liked it when I stayed silent. I returned to my desk, pulled the chair, opened the file again. I read each page, this time like a lawyer. I searched for evidence. I searched for gaps. I searched for a way to tell that boy's story so no one could tell him to apologize. Each line was a step forward. Each detail was a brick. The past was no longer where I was trapped. It was something I carried. I reached for the prosecutor assignment form. Just one signature. The pen touched the paper. I paused for a second. I thought about my mother. I thought about her eyes in the kitchen. I thought about the boy I had never saved. Then I signed. When the ink dried, I felt something change. Not relief, Not victory. Just a final door opening. This time I would not say sorry. His lawyer smiled when he saw me. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just discovered a crack in the wall I had spent my whole life building. He stood on the other side of the courtroom, suit perfect, briefcase neatly arranged, eyes sharp as knives. Robert Klein. I knew his reputation. He defended the people the rest of the world was already prepared to hate. He was good at finding a weakness and turning it into the entire story. And today, that weakness was me. The courtroom was more crowded than usual. There were reporters. Strangers filled the seats in the back, curious as if waiting for a performance. They didn't know that for me, this was not a stage. This was a place where memory could be killed again. Daniel sat beside his lawyer. He wore a white shirt, a neat tie, his hair carefully combed. If someone looked quickly, they would see an older man, exhausted from being falsely accused. He didn't look at me. He never needed to. When the hearing began, Klein stood almost immediately. He did not waste time with evidence or procedure. He went straight for me. "Your Honor," he said, "the prosecution has a serious conflict of interest." My heart pounded, but my face did not change. I had been waiting for this since I signed. Klein spoke about my past, about how I had once made similar accusations, about how authorities at the time had found no evidence. He did not need to say I had been wrong. He only needed to plant the possibility. "A prosecutor with personal motives," he said, "cannot represent justice." I heard reporters' pens moving. Klein turned toward the future jury, lowering his voice as if sharing a painful secret. "Is this a trial, or revenge legalized?" The question hung in the air. I felt the 10-year-old inside me wanting to disappear, wanting to say I would step aside, wanting everything to stop before I was stripped open in front of the whole room. But I was no longer that child. I stood. I said I was not the victim in this case. I was not a witness. I was the prosecutor assigned to protect another child. My decision was not based on the past, but on the evidence before the court. My voice was steadier than I expected. I looked at Daniel. For the first time, he looked back. No smile, only calculation. The judge called for a short recess to consider. I sat down, hands clasped under the table, where no one could see them shaking. I wondered, if they removed me, would that be failure? Or just another way he won? When the court resumed, the judge read the decision. The motion to remove the prosecutor was denied. The reason was simple. The system cannot replace law with comfort. I heard a breath leave my chest that I didn't know I had been holding. Klein did not react. He only nodded slightly, as if prepared for this outcome. For him, this was only the first move. For me, it was a line. Daniel finally looked at me longer than a second. His eyes were no longer those of a man controlling the room. He had just realized something. I had grown up, and I wasn't going anywhere. I was not the only one. That thought came to me as I opened the door to the witness waiting room behind the courtroom. The space was smaller than I expected. The fluorescent light slightly cold. The vending machine buzzing in the corner. The smell of paper, metal. The scent of people trying not to fall apart. The girl, no, the young woman, stood when I entered. Her name was Maya. I had read her file dozens of times, but seeing her in person was different. No line of text could describe the way her hands were clenched together, or how she kept her back straight as if she relaxed, everything would shatter. She looked at me, trying to guess whether I was someone who could keep a promise. I remembered looking at adults that way. I introduced myself. I said I was the prosecutor on the case. I said she would not be doing this alone. The last sentence sounded like comfort, but I knew how heavy it was. She asked me a very small question. What if they don't believe me? I wished I could say the system was always fair, that truth always won. But I had lived too long to believe in beautiful stories. So I told her the most honest thing I had. I believe you. I saw her shoulders tremble slightly. A part of her was waiting to be betrayed. I understood that feeling. When belief has been denied too many times, it becomes something dangerous to hold. We sat down. I went over her statement, asked if she wanted to change anything. She shook her head. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she had carried it for too long. When the court officer came in to say it was time, I watched the color drain from her face. The world out there was big, full of strangers, full of eyes that might doubt. I remembered the first time I imagined standing in a brightly lit room. I used to think that when the moment came, I would be strong. I was wrong. Strong does not mean not afraid. Strong is walking while afraid. I opened the door for her. As she passed me, she whispered, "Don't let them make me apologize." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I won't," I said. The courtroom fell quiet as she took the oath. Klein stood, ready. But this time I did not look at him. I looked at Maya. At first her voice was small. Then each sentence, each detail, began to assemble into something I had recognized the moment I read the file. The approach, the threats, the denial. I felt the room change. Not with noise, but with weight. People who had doubted before were now listening. Daniel did not look at her. He looked at the table. Some questions in cross-examination made her tremble. Klein did his job, digging, pressing, searching for contradictions. There were moments I thought she would break. But she didn't. Truth can be bent, but when it repeats, it becomes shape. When she stepped down from the witness stand, I saw something I had never had at her age. She was still standing. Maya passed me again. Her eyes were red, but there was something else in them. Not victory. To be seen. I returned to my table and looked at Daniel. He understood now. This was no longer the story of an imaginative child. This was a pattern, and patterns are much harder to deny. For the first time I thought, maybe this time, the truth would not have to fight alone. I saw her before she saw me. She sat in the back row near the aisle, both hands gripping her purse in her lap as if it too might leave her. Her hair was grayer than I remembered. Her back had grown smaller, as if the years had quietly taken away everything that once made her tall. My mother. I had imagined this moment many times in my life. In my old dreams, she usually came earlier, when I was still small, when a single sentence from her could change the entire world. But in real life, time does not turn back for anyone. She saw me when I stood to gather my papers. Her eyes touched me and then stayed, as if she needed to be sure the man in front of her was the child she once loved, the one she had told to stay silent. I don't know who walked toward whom first. I only know that in the end we stood facing each other in the hallway outside the courtroom. No Daniel between us, no lawyers, no one to translate the truth. "Hi," she said. Her voice was small, old, familiar enough that I had to breathe in deeply just to remain standing. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to open my mouth without breaking something. She looked at the floor for a long time. People passed by, shoes, doors opening and closing. Everything flowed like water, but between us was a still space. "The doctor said I should come," she said. "I can't keep pretending I didn't know." I heard that sentence. I waited for the feeling of victory. I had waited for it for 20 years. It did not come. Instead, there was a strange, deep sadness. Because confession, when it arrives late, saves no one. It only says things could have been different. "I knew," she continued. "Not everything, but enough." I closed my eyes. I saw the kitchen. I saw the table. I saw the child who had tried to speak. "Why didn't you—" I began, then stopped. The question was too big for this hallway, too big for two people who were already so tired. She answered even though I had not finished. "I was scared," she said. "I was afraid of losing the house. Afraid I couldn't raise you. Afraid of being alone. I thought if I didn't look, it would disappear." I realized the most painful thing was not that she hadn't believed me. It was that she had, and chose another way to survive. Her tears fell, quick and quiet. I had never seen my mother cry like that. Not the kind of crying that asks for forgiveness, The kind of crying from someone who finally stops running. "You told the truth," she said. The sentence passed through me like a cold wind. I used to think that when I heard it, I would be healed, that all the broken pieces would return to their places. But healing does not work like magic. It simply confirms the wound is real. I nodded. I did not say it was too late. I did not say I had needed that sentence when I was small. I did not say anything that could turn this moment into another trial. I just stood there, with my mother, between two people finally looking at the same truth. The signal sounded from inside the courtroom. The trial was about to resume. She wiped her tears, like someone preparing to leave shelter. I knew she could not go back to being the woman from 20 years ago. None of us could. "Do you need me to do anything?" she asked. I thought about the 10-year-old boy. If it were him, he would say yes. He would cling to the smallest chance to be protected. But I had grown. "No," I said. "I just need you to sit there and listen." She nodded. When I turned and walked back into the courtroom, I knew something. I was no longer carrying this story alone. I did not look at him when the verdict was read. I had thought about this moment many times. In my mind, it had music, relief, something like victory. But when the jury walked in and everyone stood, I felt only a strange stillness, as if my body was tired of carrying anticipation for too long. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his hands placed in front of him. He was older than the image in my memory, but some things had not changed. The way he kept his back straight, the way he believed that somehow he might still get out. I used to believe that when I was small. I used to believe adults would walk in and fix everything. The judge asked whether the jury had reached a verdict. I heard the word yes. A small word, but it can open or close an entire life. I looked at my table. I did not want my eyes to be the thing Daniel carried out of this room. I did not want to give him anything that belonged to me. Each charge was read. Guilty. With each one, the air grew heavier. I heard someone behind me begin to cry softly. I did not turn around. I stood still, the way I had practiced for years, standing firm when the truth was finally spoken. There was no cheering, no applause. Real justice is often very quiet. When the final word was read, Daniel exhaled. A sound I could not tell was defeat or relief at no longer having to pretend. The officers moved toward him. The handcuffs flashed under the lights. For a brief moment, I felt time overlap. The man in front of me and the shadow that once stood at my bedroom door. He turned his head. Our eyes met. I had thought I would say something, or feel something enormous. But no words came. There was only a space where fear had once lived, and now no one was there anymore. I did not look long. I turned away. Not because I was weak, but because I no longer belonged to him. Daniel was led out of the courtroom. The door closed behind him with a very ordinary sound. Not dramatic. Not glorious. Just an ending. I sat down. My legs suddenly felt heavy, as if my body had finally allowed itself to feel everything it had postponed. I thought I would cry. I didn't. Instead, I felt a hand gently touch my shoulder. I turned. Maya. She said nothing. She only nodded, like someone who understood that sometimes language had finished its work. Behind her, I saw my mother. She was crying, but this time I did not need her to say anything. We had gone further than words. I stood and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, daylight struck my eyes. The city continued as usual. Cars moved. People went to work. No one knew that a child's world had once ended in a room like this. And today, it had begun again. On the steps, a boy stood beside a social worker. He stared at me, not because I was famous, but because I had just come out of the place he still had to enter. I recognized that look. I used to have it. I bent down to his level. I did not promise everything would be okay. I did not say it wouldn't hurt. I did not say anything I couldn't keep. I only said, "They will hear you." The boy nodded. As I stood, I understood the cycle had stopped with me. Not because I was stronger, but because I did not turn away. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.